Here is the circuit diagram for the capacitive paddle project. There are two touch pads you can see on the top, and two 2N222 transistors, which are switching transistors, and it plugs in one end to your rig. It has an internal 3-volt battery, and that's how simple it is.
Hi, this is John Putnam, AC9UV, and we're going to walk through the capacitive key build project. Here's one of the little kits. Let's see what we've got here. There's a little box. We have a couple of brightly colored wire segments. There's a battery. A battery holder for the battery. A switch. A plug, and two little touch switches. Also, this is a little me pad. Let's see, put it over here. And that's a little prototype board. Now your touch pads may come together like that. This is what they will look like eventually. But you break them apart, and you see there's another little tab here that you can just break off. So you'll have the two touch pads. There is components on one side, and that's the touchable surface on the other. So you'll get your finger close to it, and that triggers it. There is, let me point it out. Right here, there's going to be a capacitor. It's a little SMD capacitor for each one of them to cut down the sensitivity. I'll do those prior. There's also, those are the SMD capacitors, but I'll have those on the boards already. And then there are the two switching transistors. So that's all you need. You've got all the wire, everything. The only thing really needed are cutting some holes in the sides of the box and a slot, so that the touch switches will fit. I'll show you an example in just a moment. Here we go. We're going to try this. So here are the parts. And we're going to, I like to use leftover lids to keep project parts together. Put everything in here so we don't lose them. Now here is example of the finished one. I have the jack on one end, a switch on the other, and the two touch switches. Two touch switches. I got my soldering iron in the way here. Are separated by, I have just used a piece of wood, about 1/2 inch, so you can get govern the spacing between your the touch pads just by how big a spacer you put in between. And I use hot melt glue to glue them down, so the electronics are actually glued down to the unit. And if we open this up, we can see what we have inside. I have some tape around the battery so it doesn't short out anywhere, and we have the switch and the jack, and we have the if you can see it, where's my let's see if we can pause this. So if we look, let's see if you can see it. I've got the little, it's a little too close. Alright, so the Mi board with the transistors are right there. So you can see we have, let me point it out, the wires are connected to each one of the touch pads and lead in and connect to the board. And so the power goes through the switch to the board, and we have 3 wires going to the jack, one for DITS, one for DAS, and one for ground. So it's a simple circuit, and I just noticed that some of my tape is coming off. So we'll just put this back together, and we'll see how it works. So here we have it hooked up to my Morris Reno 32. So there's an example of using the keyer. That was at 15 words per minute. So that's how it works. You can adjust the thickness depending on what you want. It's self-contained. And seems to work pretty well. It takes a little bit of time to learn the touch, depending on your habit. You may be touching the keys, and that's going to set it off, obviously. So you have to. It's a different training to get that working. So let's look at the steps and what should work. If you look at the documentation, show you pictures of the various parts and the circuit. The circuit is essentially, if you turn to the circuit diagram in the documentation, you'll see that each touchpad is attached to one of the transistors, and there's one for the dits and one for the DAs. And you see that the base is hooked up to the I think it says I on the circuit board. It has ground, I/O, and VCC. So the I/O, I just have an I on the diagram, is where the base goes, and that's what controls the switching. If you notice on the the diagram, you have one touch panel connected to the base of one transistor. So one of those touch panels will be for dits, the other will be for DAs. And you notice the circuit between collector and emitter is what will get shorted, giving you the paddle contact signal. So it doesn't really matter which is which, as long as one of them is hooked to the dit and one is hooked to the DA. Then you have to be careful when you do that you get the dit and the DA on the right side for what you want. Typically the dit is on the left and the DA on the right, but you can change that. As a matter of fact, all you have to do is flip the box over, and that reverses the dits and DAs. But that's a different story. So if you look at the Me pad, so it's the majority of the work is soldering the parts on the Me pad. And you notice, if you look carefully, it's not the best drawing, but I have the flats of the two transistors facing each other in the center of the board, and the curve facing the outside of the board. You notice I have it labeled collector, base, and emitter, and which pads to solder them to. Also, you notice there are two lines, a red line and a blue line. The red line is the positive power, and the blue line is the ground. And you see I have them wired to opposite corners, so that the circuitry is essentially symmetric on both sides, just flipped around. And you see the you see TP stands for touchpad, and PL stands for plug. So you can see the PL, there's PL1 and PL2. Those are going to the plug tip and the plug ring, and the TP1 and 2 go to the touch pads, the I/O pads. Then you see the TP plus goes to the VCC, and the TP ground goes to the ground of the corresponding touchpad. And you notice that they're labeled touchpad 1 and touchpad 2. So it's a fairly simple setup. Okay, if we look at the Me pads, they're fairly symmetric. And what we want to do is put the transistors on the Mi pads. And if we follow the diagram, we're going to take, I don't know if you can see the flat side. The flat sides will be towards the center, and we need to splay out the feet and bend them up so it'll go down on the pads that way. If we use the So if we follow along with the instructions, if you use the same color wires, they translate to wires that are colors on the diagram. And I used yellow, green, and blue. So if we find the yellow, green, and blue cables, I'm going to keep them together, so I'm going to separate out the yellow, green, and blue. Okay, so we have yellow, green, and blue, and we're going to use 1 3/4 inches. We happen to have 3.5 inches here, so this is 2.5 inches. So here I'm going to separate out, as the instructions have it, yellow, green, and blue. Yellow, green, and blue, which we'll just flick that, pull off that wire, pull off that. So we have yellow, green, and blue cable, and that's 3.5 inches long. So if we want it 1 inch and 1 3/4 inches, so we have two cables, 1 3/4 inches. It's a little shy, a little over, whatever. So we have two cables about 1 3/4 inches. Okay, then we're going to have to try to keep the cables together, but we're going to split it back about a 1/2 inch or so. So I'll have do that to both ends. Okay. So we'll have a little cable that looks something like that. And then we've got to strip the ends. So we strip the ends. So strip one, and we'll twist it. Use a wire stripper. Come on, get out of there. Okay, so we strip them, and then we twist the stranded wire so it doesn't fray. And then a good thing to do is to tin the ends. Tin the wires. I see there's a little bit of a wind up there. There we go. And we'll just put a little bit of solder. It helps to tin the wires. All right. Well, I'll finish the rest. So we have one of the cables done. The ends split up. We keep them as a 3-conductor cable. So I'll start working on the second one. Okay, you see we have now the 2 cables, both with the same color scheme. And the next thing would be to wire up the touch paddles. And they go to the ground, I/O, and VCC. So the blue will be ground, and the green is going to be the base, and the yellow is going to be the collector, if you see on the diagram. And so those correspond to the 3 holes on the 3 holes on the bottom of the board. And they're labeled. So let's wire one of them up. If you look at the photograph a little bit higher up in the that shows the touch panel that's touch, you'll notice a couple of things. You want the wires to coming up from the other side from the touch panel, and if we keep the color scheme the same, we're going to do yellow goes to VCC, green goes to I/O, and the blue goes to ground, if we can get it in that hole. Yeah. Okay. Got a little bit of extra bulb on so blue ground, green IO, VCC is yellow. Blue will be ground, and the green is going to be the base, and the yellow is going to be the collector, if you see on the diagram. And so those correspond to the 3 holes on the bottom of the board, and they're labeled. So let's wire one of them up. If you look at the photograph a little bit higher up in the that shows the touch panel that's touch, you'll notice a couple of things. You want the wires to coming up from the other side from the touch panel, and if we keep the color scheme the same, we're going to do yellow goes to VCC, green goes to IO, and the blue goes to ground, if we can get it in that hole. Yeah. Okay. Got a little bit of extra bulb on so blue ground, green IO, VCC is yellow. Okay, so we'll get it snug and bend the wires down. I don't know if you can see that. We'll clean off our soldering tip, and we'll solder the cable on. A little bit of solder. Let it start to flow, add a little bit more solder. You have enough time to go through. Let's see. Didn't quite go through. We can just get a little bit of solder on the back. We'll cut off the excess wires with our straight cutter. take a close look. Okay, and you want to make sure that that everything looks fine. I'm looking for a proper tool. Alright, what happened to my screwdriver? Alright. Okay, we're going and checking that things are soldered properly. Looks good. So we have one of the touch switches with its cable. Now we'll go ahead and do the other one. Usually when I'm going to solder onto a piece, I use a vise to hold it in place. So I can have one hand for the soldering iron and one for the solder. So a little touch on the soldering iron. Again, next to the wire and the pad. And a little touch of solder. Against the wire and the pad. Little touch of solder, a little bit more. Touch the wire and the pad, little pressure. Touch of solder, let it heat up through. Okay, and it's easy as that. So it looks like we have some good connections. We can look at the other side. Looks good. Whoop. Then we just need to, again, snip off you want to be wearing safety glasses. I happen to be wearing googly eyes, which I just the same way. I'll get a little bit more heat on that one. All right, so we have our two touch pads wired up. Now one of the things we're going to do is try to get everything wired up and tested before we actually put it in the box, because if something's not working, to pull it back out of the box is a pain in the butt. So let's see what's next. Now we're going to start wiring up the me pad. Now I always find it a good idea to wire up using the power wiring first, and I think I'm going to try to stick with convention and use so we have red, orange, red, and brown wire left over from that other piece of cable. Let's cut out the red wire. We can use that for power. And in this other cable, I'm going to pull out the black wire. Black and red typically used for ground and hot. So we're going to, looks good. So we have one of the touch switches with its cable. Now we'll go ahead and do the other one. Usually when I'm going to solder onto a piece, I use a vise to hold it in place. So I can have one hand for the soldering iron and one for the solder. So a little touch on the soldering iron. Again, next to the wire and the pad. And a little touch of solder. Against the wire and the pad. Little touch of solder. A little bit more. Touch the wire and the pad. Little pressure. Touch of solder. Let it heat up through. Okay. And it's easy as that. So looks like we have some good connections. We can look at the other side. Looks good. Whoop. And we just need to, again, snip off you want to be wearing safety glasses. I happen to be wearing googly eyes, which I just the same way. I'll get a little bit more heat on that one. All right, so we have our two touch pads wired up. Now one of the things we're going to do is try to get everything wired up and tested before we actually put it in the box, because if something's not working, to pull it back out of the box is a pain in the butt. So let's see, what's next? Now we're going to start wiring up the me pad. Now I always find it a good idea to wire up using the power wiring first, and I think I'm going to try to stick with convention and use so we have red, orange, red, and brown wire left over from that other piece of cable. Let's cut out the red wire. We can use that for power. And in this other cable, I'm going to pull out the black wire. Black and red typically used for ground and hot. So we're going to wire a ground from if you look at the diagram, we're going to wire a ground from this corner to that corner across the bottom, and from this corner we're going to do the VCC from that corner to that corner. Okay? So a good way to do that, I find, is tack down one side, and then you can measure what you need. So cut and twist. Tin the lead. Okay. It's a good idea to tin your pads as well beforehand. So let's see if we can. So I'm going to tin the pads. You just put a little bit of solder on the pads. And we're going to put the transistors on those pads. Now I'm going to take the ground wire, trim that a little bit. I'll trim it just a bit more. Okay, that's good. Trouble is having it stable. I think that should be good. So we can bend it under the board and figure out about how much we need. We don't want too much. So we'll cut it about there. So we have enough wire to go down. And we'll strip this end, bend it over and solder it on that point. Again, we're going to tin our pads. And the transistor is going to go on these pads. I want to twist and tin this end. And wrap it around and fold it down. That should work. Voila. So we have the ground connection connected across the back. And we'll do the same across the back for the VCC. So we'll put the red and black wires, so we have essentially a power wiring done. Now the next thing would be to put the transistors on. So you want to get a bend in the wires. I'm bending it, if you can see that. I'm bending the wires away from the flat. Okay, so it'll turn out. Let's see if we can get this down a little bit. The flat side goes on the inside, and the 3 wires go onto the 3 outer ones. We're not using the 4th one, just the 3 on that side. So what we can do, one of the tricks is to figure out how long the leads need to be, not too long, and cut a couple of them off. And bend it out so that okay, and we're going to leave one of them. We're going to leave one of them up as a little handle. I can hold on to it while I'm soldering it. Okay, so again, I will put it into I need to go up a little bit. It's not terribly clear. A little up a little bit. There we go. That's better. Okay, so I can, and it's a good idea to use a pair of needle nose pliers, if I can find mine, to hold on to. So we'll position the transistor down and then tack down the legs. And it's always good to, as I say, tin the legs a little bit. It's a little awkward trying to do it on camera. Okay, we've got one lead on. We'll push it down a little bit. Tack the first one down, then we can move things around. I want to get that other legs down, spaced out. And just a little bit of solder. The other 2 legs. I'll go back to the first one. make sure that's good. Okay, so I now have one transistor on the board, and I'll cut off that little extra leg, and we're going to repeat that process with the other transistor. I'll go ahead and do that. Okay, here we have the two transistors soldered. We have the power wiring. Now it's just a matter of wiring the other things up, and then we can test it. Now we have to do some planning about drilling holes in the box. Now you notice there is, let's see if we can, on the box there's those two little holes. I like to put that in the front. Makes it easier to open. So I'll put the, well, we're going to cut a slot in the front, and you can use a little saw, cut it multiple times with a linoleum knife. You could even melt through it. There are different ways to do it, but a little saw is probably, and with a file, is probably the best. Then on the other side, we're going to cut a hole for the jack. Now, depending on where you put it, it's going to affect where the switch can fit. So we're going to have inside, we're going to have the touch panels coming in a little bit, and then we're going to have the printed circuit board after that. So the switch has to find some room in here, and the jack is going to come back on the inside a certain distance, and we're going to have space on the top for the battery. So I don't know if you can see those things. There we go. So switch, jack coming back, space for the battery. So this is going to want to be down far enough. Now it's a flat, so it can go, we just have to make sure that it's up high enough that it'll fit. And you see, this is going to come back a certain distance, so we have to have space behind it. So we might be able to, so this is trying to go and figure out what a layout is going to be. You see, this extends back a little bit, so we want to make sure there's space. Now this is a slightly different jack than you probably have. Let me see which ones we have in. Now I've changed over to using these jacks rather than these jacks. You notice this one is much smaller. And which gives you more leeway for figuring out where to put the switches. So it's not a bad idea at this point to figure out where you're going to put your holes and put in first this, then figure out where you can put your switch and drill that hole, and then we'll have some idea of the length of wires that you're going to need to hook all this stuff together. Before that, though, we can sort of make some judgments about how big that's going to be. You know that this is going to be fitting in here, and we already have our wires set up here, so we can actually wire the touchpads to the board and run off all the wires from the board to where they're going to connect. You can trim them down to a smaller amount when we actually start fitting things in. And before you fit everything in, you want to hook it all together, see that it works, then you put it in. And so in putting it in, you'll have cut the slot here. Well, actually, you're going to take and find something to put in between the two touchpads, wood or acrylic or something, and you'll glue these on there. And so they will lead through, and that whatever that is going to be has got to be longer than the touch panels. They have to extend in far enough that it will fit into this slot and be solid, and you'll glue it in somehow. I used hot melt glue. Other people have used silicon seal. You could use epoxy. The other thing I did was the material that I used, I actually cut out a little channel in that material so the wires would sort of fit down in that, and so it would it would be flat going into the groove. So those are just things to consider. So almost the next thing to do is we're going to wire the touch panels to the circuit board, and then we're going to run wires from the circuit board out that ultimately are going to hook up to the battery, the jack, and the switch. So the way this will work, the board is is symmetrical. We know that we put the blue line on ground, the yellow on the VCC, and the green line is I/O. So if you look at the diagram, so yellow is VCC, so that's going to go on the corner. That's where the red wire is. And the next one over is actually goes to the plug. So that's the signal that the signal that will go out as the key or output. And so we're going to do one wire here, skip one, and do the next two with green and followed by blue. So we have one side done. Now I'll go on to the other side. There we have the two sides done. Now, if you notice, okay, we haven't used this pad or that pad. So this one is power, and the ground is here. So we can use one of these two pads to put because it's connected there. We can put the VCC, the plus 3.7 volts, whatever it is, connection here, and we don't have to load up on that. We are going to have to load up on one of the ground ones to get the ground wire off there. So we still have a wire to come out here and a wire to come out here, which are signal wires that go out to the jack, and are the ones that when we touch here, when we touch this one, this line is going to go to ground, and that's what the radio is going to see as key down. So you touch that, this goes to ground. Because the I/O pin here is on the base of this switching transistor, and the transistor switches, and it switches between there and ground. And that's how this works. So that's our next job, is to put two wires out for the output jack and a power and a ground wire on. So let me get that done and get back to you. So here I'm going to tack on the power wiring. First we're going to tin this pad, and then attach the wire. Whoop. Let's tin the wire and then tack it. You don't want the wires to be too long. Actually, I'm going to shorten that a little bit. We don't want any solder bridges. That's a good connection. All right. So that's the power wire. I'm going to put the ground wire on the same top side of the board. That works. So I decided to use white and gray. I had them connected together still. I'll use that for the dit and da that goes out to the jack. I'll keep them together. So I tinned the wires, and I just have to tack them down. Okay, let me shorten them a little bit. Don't want to have too much so that we get solder bridges. Okay, so since I'm going to have it leading off there, just have to make sure that we're not shorted out there, so let me a little bit more central. A couple of little whiskers hanging off. We'll trim those. Looks like we have a potential solder bridge here. And my green wire. Let me just make sure that's not an issue. Okay. That looks better. Twist the wire. Tin it. Okay, that's looking good. So actually, we have enough together that we can actually test. So let me set up a little test and see if that works. So here I have a little test set up. Here I have the battery and switch that I had for a test. You see it's got 3.26 volts on it. Okay, and so we know that I have it marked plus and minus there, so we know that the minus is going to go to our brown, and our plus is going to go to the red. Now what we want to find out is, this is my meter, and we'll see if the touchpads work. Well, okay. Resistance is high. There it's going to low. So this touchpad is working. Nothing on this touchpad. This touchpad is working. Alright, so we'll look at the other lead, and it should be this touchpad is working. This touchpad is not. So we have success. That's great. Now it's just a question of getting it into the box. Okay, you can see it's a very simple circuit. Simple but effective. So what's next? I'll start drilling some holes in the box. Then we'll lay it out and we'll start wiring it in. Also, I need to get the piece of wood or something that will allow me to put these two together and stick them out the front. So that's what we have currently. Let's go on to the next step then. I'm going to drill holes. So I'm going to drill a hole in the back of the box. We'll be using the smaller jacks. You have to plan on the thickness of the bottom too. And if we look at it, there's also some standoffs in there, and you may want to cut off the standoff, so that you want to cut off the standoff so that you can fit the jack in there. So we're going to cut that off, and I've taken a sharp thing and just put a little hole, and then we're going to drill the hole up to 1/4 inch in 3 stages. First a starter, then take off a little bit more, then take off a lot. And if you just try to go all the way to 1/4 inch, you can crack the plastic. It's easier to do it in a couple of 3 stages. So the first thing is then to cut out with safety glasses on is always a good idea. And I just my diagonal cutters, my flat cutters. That's probably enough. So we have essentially eliminated that. Now we're going to put this in the vise and move it back a little bit. Okay. First hole. Now if you get it too far down so it doesn't fit, you can always take a round file and go in the direction you need to. We're in DIY territory here, so and let's see. Whoop. That will fit nicely. Okay, so we've got that all set. One thing I noticed is this box is thick, and these threads don't come out too far, so you may need to you can just barely get a bite onto the thread. In this case, not really. Okay, so what we may have to do is then do a little bit of scraping on the inside so that the jack can stick through enough that we can catch threads. So I'll do that and we'll get back to you. well, I got that mounted. There was just really, because of the plastic, there was some plastic sticking out in the back, and I just needed to clean that up, and it came through. So now we know where that can be positioned. And I want to see where we can put this. Okay. Then you have to make a decision which way you want on to be. You know, that's on, that's off. And again we have potentially to deal with a little nubby thing there. I want to have it as kind of as low as possible. Well, I could make it in the middle. Will this go? I can probably do it here. So I think we'll put a little bit towards the back. Now if we do that, then our leads can be shorter. So somewhere in here. Somewhere in there. Is that going to cause us some trouble? Well, I'm going to get rid of this guy anyway. Yeah. You would use that if you were going to screw in a printed circuit board or something. So now we know where we're going to put that, and I'll drill that hole. Okay, we're all set here. I'm going to take and start the hole. I've marked the spot. So I think we're going to put it right about there. So we'll give it a little bit of a starter. Lock that in. Second size. And final 1/4 inch. In and out a little bit. And I'll clean up that hole. So we have that hole drilled and cleaned up. Now this comes with a little circle with the tab on it, the nut, and a lock washer. And then there's another nut inside, and the nut inside is to so you can space it back so it doesn't stick out too much. This little tab can fit in a little hole if you put a little hole to try to prevent things from moving. There's a slot in the shaft, and there's a little dimple in there, so it would go in there, and it would prevent, once you screwed it in, it would prevent the switch from turning. But as long as you tighten it down, that's usually not an issue, so I don't typically use those. So if we put it in and see that it sticks out not too much, and we can put put in the we can actually put that on the inside. A little bit cleaner look. You can use a pliers opened up. Tighten it in, so then we have our two things. Now you probably want to turn this one around so that the tabs that you're going to solder to are facing up, and we may want to turn this around so these tabs are going are on the other side, but those are little subtleties. So what we have, getting close, we're going to have these things there, and this is going to be in that location, and our battery is going to go right in the middle. Okay, so next, and we know this works, the next thing is to find something to put between these two and glue them in place. Then we know how big a slot we need to cut, so we cut the slot here, and then we can see that that fits. Then we finish the wiring here. Now there's the we have to finish put one wire from the battery to the switch on the positive side, and that will go to this red wire. These two will go to the tip and ring there, and we need one more grounding wire to go there. So we'll probably do a wire from the ground on the battery to the ground on the jack. So we have two wires connected to the ground there, and one wire connected to the positive, and we have to verify which is which. So the next thing, I'm going to go and find something to put between the touchpads, and I'll be back. So I found some wood, and we're going to do something like that, make it a little bit larger than that. So it'll be 1 inch long and about 3/8, just a little bit more than 3/8 inch deep, and it's going to be 1/4 of an inch thick. So, which means maybe 3/8 when you get all the glue and the two things fastened together. So that's where we're going. Yeah, one of the subtleties, if we have this here, you see where the wires go. So I'm going to gouge a little bit out so the wires will fit flush with the side of this, which will make it easier going through the slot, and it'll protect the wires. So that's just a little subtlety. Probably a Dremel tool, and I'll gouge that out before I cut it out of here. It's a lot easier to hold this steady than to hold a little piece steady. Well, we've got the space gouged on both sides with the Dremel. So when we fit one of these here, the wires just fit right into the channel, so that it will be flat when it goes through. So that being the case, the we'll probably have the box coming through about here. So we'll have maybe a quarter of an inch or more sticking inside the box, and use that for strength. So the next thing to do is to cut this out and maybe start firing up the hot glue gun. Well, we're back. We have it all cut out, gouged out on both sides. Now, make sure that we don't have any wires that look like they're going to be too close together. And we're going to start gluing these things down. Okay. I use the hot melt glue, so you have a certain amount of time. So let me position it and then put some glue in here and glue it down. So first is a tack, and then I'm going to flow some into the and we'll squeeze some in, seal it up. You want to take something and clean it off. You have a little time to play. So we have one side fastened down. You can use different kinds of glue. It doesn't have to be hot melt. This is just works pretty well and is pretty solid. Okay, so we'll get some goop. Center it. You have just a few seconds to play before it hardens enough, and we'll fill in the edges and some on the wires. I want to get it around so that it is sealed. And not too much excess. Looking pretty good. I was going to color this wood before, I should have, but I'll just go over it with a magic marker or a Sharpie after. You can be as neat as you want, or not. So this not only seals it from water, but so Also stabilizes it mechanically. Okay, so there we've got that. We'll let that dry. Okay, and so you can see how that's going to fit inside. So we can bend our leads can bend out a little bit, so this can squish down. Yeah, like that. Okay, so it'll fit right in that space. And we want this to be far enough out that our fingers can get in there, pads of our fingers. So if you notice in the one that I had here, so it's probably 1/8 of an inch or more between the bottom of the board and that, so this sticks out. So now we know what size this is, and so we can mark how big a slot we need to cut. So we want to generally cut it in the middle, and so I'll have to mark that and cut that. Now, one of the things that you have to be aware of is that the lid is going to come down. The lid is going to come down, and you see the little ridge. Okay, actually we'll do it. Which way do we do it? Doesn't matter. Okay. So that ridge is a problem. So I have to cut out a portion of this ridge so that it, or it can be a problem. Let's see if you can see it on the other one that I did. You see, I cut out just a piece of that where it comes down. So that so what we want to do is mark our slot, cut it, and then that tells us where on the lid we need to cut, and then we cut that. So it's getting close. So that's the next thing, is to cut our slot. So I'm going to measure that and cut that out, and I'll be back. We're back, and we cut the slot. Let's see if we can. So there's the slot, and it slots in very tightly. So it fits like that, and we'll hot glue it in place. So we have plenty of room for our electronics. Now we can sort of bend our wires, shorten the ones that we need to make things fit without too much trouble. So we're almost there. We just have to notch out that little place on the lid. So we'll have to get rid of the little guy here, and then just notch out that piece, mark it, and clip it. and a very effective marker. Well, plastic is easy enough to just cut out. So essentially, that is cut out. Just a little bit. And we'll take a file. Just clean it up a little bit. So our cases, our modifications to the case are done. So the only thing left is to get our wires set up. What we're going to do is measure the wires out, then take the switch and the plug out, and put the battery in, wire it up, and check to see that it works before we lock it back in. Then we'll put everything back in, screw those in, and the last thing we'll do is hot melt glue the touch pads in place. So the next thing then is to sort of measure out the wires, and I will do that and get back to you. Okay, we're all measured out. What I did was the long red wire, I cut that so I could attach that to the switch, and I took the rest of the red wire, and that'll go from the other side of the switch to the battery plus. I took the ground wire, which is going to go to the ground on the battery, and took the rest of that, and that'll go to the ground. Actually, I think I will make a little bit longer wire go to the ground of the jack, so that you need to be able to pull the battery out to be able to change the battery. You don't want it too tied in too much. And these the only other two wires we already have set up for the tip in the ring. Now the things that you need to do, we've got is to decide which is the tip and which is the ring. We'll probably put it in this way, and so we have to figure out which is the tip and the ring, or the dit and the da. So the tip of the plug will go to the dit, is the usual convention. So we have to rediscover which, the gray or the white, is going to be the dit. So we're going to put it in this way, not that way, because the wires are going the wrong way. So this is definitely going to be the dit. So we'll find out which one of those is the dit, and find out which one of the, is the tip. You can tell that by looking at the stick in a plug and see which contact the tip goes to, and you can use a multimeter to find out precisely which one that is, and so you know where to go. So that's the direction we're heading. I'm going to cut one more little wire for the ground, and then I'll pull everything out and solder it all together, and then we'll test it. So be back in a minute. So it's easy enough to see. Okay, if we're going to put it in this way, and we put it in this way, these wires go to this side of the board, and it's the gray wire. Okay, so the gray wire is going to go to the tip for the dit. I've cut another brown wire for the ground, and so I will put all that together, and we'll be back in a minute. So looking at the jack, I have one side of my multimeter hooked up to the screws, that's the ground, and we see that the tab with the hole is the ground. Okay. Now we can look at the. You can tell by looking at the layers, but if we look there, so this is the tip, which will be the dip. So I'll bend that out a little bit so I know that that's what that is. And the other one is this guy that contacts further down. That's the ring. And that's fine, and we check and see that the other tabs don't connect to that. So we know how to wire that now. We're back. I have it all wired up here. The only thing we need to do is put in the battery, and we can see if it works, and then we can load it up into the box.